Most of you either are familiar with the words or that you know the words. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. When I prayed that prayer today, I was again reminded, and I was profoundly moved by how each of those petitions turn our attention away from heaven toward our neighbor on earth. This is a justice prayer. And so today I lingered over the justice statement, give us this day our daily bread. We petition to God to give us because bread ultimately comes from the hand of God. And we know that God is a bountiful provider. And yet, around the world, it is estimated that more than 690 million people go hungry. In 2019, more than 10% of all US households were not sure where their next meal would come from. And for 9 million adults and 360,000 children in the United States, it did not come. In Arizona, 11.7% experienced food insecurity, and in 2019, over 300,000 households lacked the food that they needed for a healthy life. A healthy life. You see, daily bread is so much more than food. Martin Luther wrote in the Small Catechism that daily bread includes the necessities and nourishment for our bodies, such as food and drink, but also clothing and shoes and house and farm and fields and livestock, money and property, an upright spouse and children and upright members of a household, upright and faithful rulers, good government, good weather, peace, health, self-control, good reputation, good friends, faithful neighbors, and the like. All of the necessities that Luther listed bring abundant and healthy life. And the problem is us. Abundant life for others is tied to our United States consumption, as well as our economic practices and our policies. I recently heard a story that illustrates this. A strawberry picker from Central America said to a group of visitors from the United States, "Our children go hungry, you know, because this land grows strawberries for your table, and it should be growing beans and corn for our children." It doesn't need to be this way. We can forget, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we are inextricably interconnected to each other. The well-being of our neighbor is deeply a matter of faith and deeply connected to our relationship with God. From the Lutheran tradition, we can't throw up our hands and just wait for God to solve this problem. God hungers for all people to experience abundant life. God is at work in the world through us. God brings justice through us, and it's my hope that as we listen, God will change us so that we might be change agents, so that all may have daily bread. Will you pray with me a prayer from Mother Teresa of Calcutta? Make us worthy, Lord, to serve our fellow human beings throughout the world who live and die in poverty and hunger. Give them through our hands this day, give them their daily bread, and by our understanding love, give peace and joy. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop Deborah. Lupe.
Thank you very much, Bishop Deborah, for being here with us, and thank you for your leadership. We really appreciate you. And now it is with my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today. I have a little bit of a bio here. So Eugene Cho is the founder and former senior pastor of Quest Church, an urban multicultural, multi-generational church in Seattle, Washington. After 18 years, Eugene stepped aside at Quest in 2018. He's also the founder and executive director of the Q Cafe, an innovative nonprofit community cafe and music venue, which closed due to relocation in 2015. Eugene's also the founder and visionary of One Day's Wages, a grassroots movement of people's stories, actions to alleviate extreme global poverty. The vision of One Day's Wages is to create a collaborative movement that promotes awareness, invites simple giving, and supports sustainable relief through partnerships, especially with small organizations in developing regions. Since its launch in October of 2009, One Day's Wages has raised over $8 million for projects to empower those living in extreme global poverty. One Day's Wages has been featured in the New York Times, the Seattle Times, NPR, Christianity Today, and numerous other media outlets. Reverend Eugene Cho and his wife have been married for 23 years and have 3 amazing children. Together, they live in Seattle, Washington, and I would like to introduce our president of Bread for the World, Reverend Eugene Cho.
All right. Well, thank you so much. What a pleasure and an honor. And I regret the fact that we're not able to meet in person, but all of you do look incredible here on the virtual screen. I thought what I would do, since my dear friends and colleagues have allocated about 15 minutes, is I'll share a little bit about my story, a little bit about the work of Bread, and some vision upcoming. And I'm especially looking forward to engaging the questions that were both written and perhaps some new questions that might rise up as a result of our conversation. I also just want to name how important it was for us to start off with a prayer and a devotion. So thank you, Bishop, for that, because it's a reminder for us as a people that we have to be grounded in our identity as followers of God, wherever we might be in our journeys, for us to be grounded in that identity. So I am joining you from Seattle, Washington. And I was just looking outside my window for a second because this is the first glimpse of sun that I've seen in several days. And I'm not even joking. If your impression of Seattle is that it's always gray and rainy and drizzly, especially during the fall, winter months, you are absolutely correct. And so I am just so ecstatic right now to get some vitamin D. I have lived here in Seattle for about 23 years, right after my wife and I got married. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, which means that she wins every argument in our home. Pause for dramatic effect. We have 3 children, 2 that are in college, and our youngest is a senior in high school right now. What that means is that every single day we're all fighting for our Wi-Fi bandwidth. I told them to be off for the next hour so that we wouldn't have any issues. My parents were both born in what is now called North Korea. And one of the reasons why fighting poverty is so personal to me is because it's part of our family story. Yes, it's because of my faith in Jesus that compels me, but there's also a personal reason why this matters so much, especially as I started as the new president of Bread for the World in July. I always remind myself and others that it is a deeply personal story. My parents, as I shared earlier, were born in what is now called North Korea. Back when they were children, there was only one country. War broke out, communism began to kind of surface in that nation, and they experienced unfathomable hunger. For example, my father still tells me stories about needing to pull out grass from the ground to consume it to satisfy his hunger pangs. He shared stories with me. In fact, I think 2 years ago, he shared with me for the very first time. So it took him 82 years to share this story with anyone. But as a young boy, he had lived in a refugee camp during the rise of the Korean War, separated from his family. So again, it's very personal. My wife and I, when we planted our church about 20 years ago, we had experienced a season of just chaos and struggle. And for a season, I was unemployed. And had it not been the safety net program of something called Women, Infant, and Children, the WIC program, we would have been in a very, very difficult situation. Now, this year has been a tremendous challenge for all of us. And our family, there have been many, many challenges. But having said that, let me also be very blunt with you. In the past 8, 9 months since March, when lockdowns began in Seattle and around the country, we have never had to worry about our next meal. Never. We've had to never worry about how to pay for our next month's rent or our mortgage payment. So we consider ourselves, all things considered, very, very fortunate. The reality is that that's not the case. And we're not just talking about a handful of people. We are going through a major hunger crisis and employment crisis. We're going through a major, major situation, both in our larger nation and around the world. But I think we need to actually come a little closer. It's not just this nebulous space in some remote place around the country. We're talking about our own cities, our communities. We're talking about our families and our churches as well. As I've been thinking about the work of Bread for the World and the advocacy that all of us are engaged in, I have been keeping very near to my heart some of my former church congregants that are on the SNAP program, that are on the pandemic EBT program. I am thinking about real names, real stories, real families. And I think this is so important. And this is why I'm so moved by my colleagues like Lupe and Solveig, because sometimes I think when you do advocacy world, especially like Bread for the World, anchored in DC, we can be talking a lot about these policies, and they're all very important. But if we're not careful, we'll end up reducing people into projects. And God never intended people to be projects. So I'm so grateful for this gathering because it again humanizes and dignifies the real challenges that people are going through. I suspect that many of you already know this, but sometimes it's good to be reminded. Depending on what sources you cite, anywhere from about 32 to 54 million Americans by the end of this year are experiencing the challenges of hunger. Specifically, 1 out of 3 American families with children right now are having a hard time putting food on the tables. 40% of Black and Brown and Indigenous families, 40%, nearly 1 out of 2. That is unconscionable, and it's hard to just fathom, but that's the current reality of our situation. 14 to about 17 million children right now are having a hard time putting food on the table. And as our bishop mentioned earlier, globally speaking, the numbers are even more staggering. The World Food Program estimates that those who are going to experience abject hunger will double up from 135 to 270 million human beings. So by the end of this year, despite some significant progress that's been made in the last 10 years, 115 more million people are going to enter into what experts consider extreme poverty, those who survive on less than $1.90 a day. If we don't do anything, if people don't respond, churches, individuals, companies, and certainly our nation's leaders, that will likely increase to 150 more million people that will be living in extreme poverty. And the translation for that is that their lives become even that much more vulnerable. So, you know, a part of me wants to give everybody a rah-rah message that everything's going to be okay. But I think part of justice work is we have to be truth tellers. And part of truth telling right now is that these are very dire, difficult, challenging circumstances. And it's not just because of COVID. It's because of racism that exists in our nation. And let's all be honest, that didn't just happen in the year 2020. That's been around in our systems and in our own lives for generations upon generations. We've seen racism against Black and Brown neighbors. We've even seen the rise of rampant racism as a result of COVID-19 to our Asian sisters and brothers, not just in our nation, but also around the world. In addition to this, we're seeing unprecedented chaos as a result of the recent presidential elections. And I, having been a naturalized American citizen, one of the things that I love the most about this country about this imperfect nation is our commitment to a democracy, however imperfect that it may be. And so it was very important, again, that I exercise the right and the privilege and the burden to vote and also to encourage this democracy process to unfold. Now, having said that, I think it's so important for all of us, whatever our political inclinations may be, to be praying for both our current but our incoming administration as well. And so I join hopefully many others that are praying for President-elect and our VP-elect Kamala Harris and President-elect Joe Biden as well. And as we do so, we're certainly praying for a peaceful transition and for significant work that needs to be done. I think for the time being, because I would love to allocate more time for the questions that are both shared, but hopefully new ones that might sprout out, I would love to pass the microphone back to my respective colleagues here. And please feel free to ask anything and everything, but let's not talk about the Seattle Seahawks who lost this past weekend and lost to the Phoenix. Anyways, I'll stop right there.
Well, I'll jump in and ask a question if it's all right if I kick this off.
Yep.
Reverend Cho, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for this sharing your personal story. So I'm wondering, since Bread for the World is this collective Christian voice urging our nation's decision makers to end hunger at home and abroad, what would you say is the role of the church and people of faith in this anti-hunger movement, and how do we use our prophetic voices to uplift the challenges and stories of the folks, as you talked about, in our local communities, people that we know?
Yes, Bishop, thank you so much for that question. So I would begin, for me, this is all about our theological convictions. It's actually about our worship. When you look back in the Old Testament and we're thinking about Amos chapter 5, we have these really powerful prophetic words about God speaking through his mouthpiece, his prophet Amos, saying that God detests, God hates our empty worship. And so when our worship is devoid of any conviction about justice, including those who experience hunger and poverty, God basically says, get this away from me. This is not what true worship is. So when we speak about our role in the church and people of faith, I would say that this is not a secondary or a tertiary issue. It is very much part of who we are and who we worship. Isaiah 61:8, I, the Lord, love justice. So justice is not some sort of an elective, a clothing accessory that we wear on or off season when it's cool or uncool. It is a very distinct part of our discipleship. When I first became a Christian at the age of 18, probably for the first 10 or 12 years, I never heard about something called advocacy. It was never a part of our discussion, our Bible studies, our worship, our preaching. It was only later on that I began to realize that as followers of Jesus, it's not the only thing that we do, but it is a critical part of our witness to this nation and around the world. So how do we do this? I think we have to keep praying about this. We have to make sure that justice is something that we study about, speak about, elevate, worship, discuss, preach, and the list goes on. And the last thing that I'll just share for the sake of this question is that we have to be very mindful that our Christian identity, I usually speak about it in 6 ways, and I'll quickly go over this. We have to be pastoral, we have to be prophetic, we have to be personal, we have to be practical, we have to be prayerful, and we have to be persistent. So in other words, we're not going to simply kumbaya our way out of injustice in the world. We have to be prophetic and lift our prophetic voices. But sometimes I also fear that we can be so obsessed with being prophetic that we forget the call to also be pastoral, to engage with loving hearts and kindness those that we are urging to speak up and act on behalf of those who are experiencing injustice in the world. So I'll stop at that point.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angie Rogers. I'm the CEO of the Arizona Food Bank Network. We're a network of the 5 large food banks and the 1,000 pantries that serve about 1.3 right now million Arizonans across the state on a fairly frequent basis given the pandemic. And so my question is centered in that we had been making some good strides, I think, in nutrition policy, in emergency food relief, and then we had COVID. And that pandemic kind of washed away all of the economic progress and the employment levels that we were seeing, and now we're facing obviously a very different circumstance. Food banks and others, we've been struggling to keep up with demand, but we also recognize that it's going to take more than us to solve this problem. So maybe can you share a little bit about what you've already done to talk to other anti-hunger organizations and state at the state and federal level on a common policy agenda for this new administration and what we could potentially work together on for the next 4 years?
Angie, thank you so much. And let me just first begin by thanking you for your service and for your leadership. This is the first time that we're meeting, but I just don't think people understand. If they don't know, they don't quite understand the challenges that local food banks are currently going through. What you shared is what I hear from every single food bank provider around the nation, that demand has increased from 4 to 8-fold. And people thought that that was the reality in the first 3 months of the COVID lockdown, but it's still ongoing. And in some places, it's even increasing. So as we accentuate the necessity of food banks, those that have been around, and even private food pantries, we're seeing lots of churches respond to the COVID crisis by starting their own distribution centers. And so again, all of that should be applauded. And having said that, many of us have heard this phrase, but I'll say it again, we're not going to food bank our way out of this situation. Even before COVID, with all the good that individuals and churches were doing, it probably constituted, as according to some experts, about 10% of all the work that was going on in our nation and around the world. So it's just unfathomable to expect that we can increase this by 10-fold so that the government no longer needs to respond. It's really a both and situation. So what do? We have to keep celebrating our food banks, our private providers, and as your question basically alluded to, we just need more synergy. We need more partnership, more collaboration. We need really ongoing, robust dialogue to take place. From a state and federal level, there's a few things that Bread for the World has been acting upon. The number one thing is to increase and to ask for a protection of our SNAP benefits and to increase SNAP benefits by 15% currently. Anyone that knows anything about SNAP benefits realize that it's really a win-win situation. It's dignifying, it places resources, real resources to people that are in need right now. It stimulates the economy, which is currently also something that we need. A huge win for Bread for the World and anti-hunger organizations during a very tumultuous time, because right now we're still fighting for the 3rd round of COVID relief, but we were able to secure something called pandemic EBT benefits, and that will last till September of 2021. This is something that I wish everybody was talking about and all the news we're talking about. We need more of this. And specifically speaking, before COVID, there were 30 million children that were on some sort of subsidized or free meal programs in schools around the country. So this pandemic EBT win, legislative win, secures security for these children for the next year or so. But right now, this is part of the challenge, is that I think we need more robust discussions and synergy about food systems. And as we're having these discussions, we need to be listening to local leaders, local organizers, and continuing to make sure that there is a deep connection between the grass tops and the grassroots. You'll probably hear this again and again from me, is that we need to elevate our local leaders and make sure that we're listening to our local churches and pastors who are so well connected to the realities of our streets. So I'll stop right there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Eugene Cho. We're gonna bring on Carlos Navarro. Carlos is a really long time good bread volunteer and member. So Carlos, can you ask your question?
Yes, welcome to Bread, Reverend Cho. I've been a Bread for the World member for 38 years, and I was on the board for a few iterations, and I currently serve as a volunteer state coordinator in New Mexico for Bread, and also helped convene the Interfaith Hunger Coalition, which is one of the sponsors of this town hall. My question deals with the rural areas, and as you'll probably learn that this region that Lupe leads is very rural, even though there's the big metropolitan areas like Phoenix, and there's Oklahoma City, big cities in Texas, and we have Albuquerque, which is a mid-sized city. There's a hugely rural area, and the rural areas are facing a lot of challenges, including the impact of climate change, the lack of water in many of these rural areas. So the question is, there's a growing divide between rural and urban communities in the United States. This is something that we need to address with our anti-hunger policies. What initiatives is Bread promoting to address hunger and poverty in rural communities, including our native reservations? There's a lot of native communities in this region. How shall we promote food security in a food desert?
Carlos, thank you so much for being on this call. Thank you for being a member at Bread for so many years, and thank you for your service as a board member in years past. We're really grateful. While I became the president on July 1, as a pastor, we've partnered with Bread for numerous years. We've hosted speakers and film screenings. And I know that the strength of Bread is members like you. So I just really want to again name and honor you for your service and for your leadership. You're absolutely right that there is a divide between rural and urban communities. Much of it is unintentional, and a lot of it is just systemic. I don't think people are out there saying we don't like rural communities, but I think part of the challenge here is that we just don't have enough representation that are elevating the challenges and the realities of rural communities. There are some well-intended people who think that poverty only exists in urban settings. Or some people think that when it comes to rural hunger, it only applies to certain segments or certain demographics, when in fact, it really is pervasive. When people talk about wanting to tackle, for example, racial hunger, well, racial hunger exists in both urban communities and also in rural communities as well. We have to also acknowledge that hunger is not a partisan issue. In a political context right now, where everything seems so polarized, we have to keep beating this drum that hunger is not a partisan issue, that this applies and engages and affects so many millions of Americans, white, Black, brown, indigenous, Asians, and the list goes on. So I think part of it is, it might not necessarily be new initiatives, and it doesn't feel very fancy or very glamorous, but I think every single one of us, we have a deep responsibility of being truth tellers and good storytellers, elevating these real challenges all around the world. Now, beyond storytelling, I think we have to make sure that we're also highlighting indigenous people of color. We have to be elevating their stories and their leadership. Some of you may have seen news that we're seeing unprecedented or new representation from people that are indigenous, those who are people of color. We need more of these leaders in Congress. We need more of these leaders in every single sphere. And as a result, they're not just speaking up only on matters that affect them, but we know that they'll also be addressing and engaging these particular issues as well. One of the points that you mentioned is that it's not just, again, SNAP benefits. We're talking about the positives of SNAP benefits, and they're very important, but that's not sustainable. It's not going to empower people to experience more flourishing lives. And you addressed, again, needing to address some of the root causes, whether it's jobs, whether it's discrimination, whether it's climate change, whether it's food systems. It's a lot of work, but it's very important work that needs to be done. And those are the things that Bread for the World is seeking to do, along with your participation and so many others.
Thank you so much, Reverend Cho, for that. And Carlos, thank you very much for your service, and thank you for everything you do for New Mexico, the Southwest region, the country. We really appreciate you so, so much. And with that, we're gonna go over to Paul Rodriguez. Paul, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you, Reverend Cho, and thank you, Mr. Coenchas. Thank you, everyone online right now. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Paul Rodriguez. I'm an occupational therapist from El Paso, Texas, and of course, as part of my path of seeking a second doctorate, I of course am a volunteer with Bread for the World since September, of course, of this year. And it's been a tremendous opportunity and blessing in so many ways. Working as an occupational therapist, I work with many families. I'm a home health occupational therapist in pediatrics, and I of course encounter a lot of families, and of course a lot of these families have to go without certain resources. A lot of families in need. In various parts of the El Paso County region, throughout the region here in El Paso, Texas, and I've seen a lot of families, have to go without certain resources, rent, food, what have you. And I've even had some families reach out to me and my cohorts for assistance, and we've gladly provided the help and so forth, but. Due to the what's going on with COVID, I of course as a therapist, I have to see patients in the home. I have to interact with these patients in the home, and it is an honor to do so. It's a labor of love, and it's also part of my love for God as well. And with the numbers increasing here in El Paso, there's a lot of I guess direct and indirect effects of the virus in regard to poverty and resources and those that are having to go without right now. So my question, of course, is in regard to what is going on, in regard to what I have just spoken about, what is, of course, Bread for the World? How are they going to approach the racial wealth gap here in the border region, or of course in general? And then, of course, providing food security for this border region, so that we could have that aspect looked at a little bit more profoundly.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak amongst you all.
Brother Paul, thank you so much for your question and for your comment and for living out your faith. That's my takeaway as you shared a little bit about your story, that you do what you do, not just simply out of compassion for your neighbor, but also out of our love and worship for God. And so thank you for that. It's a great question and it's a hard question. And this is why, as the new president, I should be just talking up Bread for the World constantly. But I want you to realize Bread for the World is only one organization among many organizations that all need to be faithful and to do their work. And because what Bread does is that we work purely around the realm of advocacy. So we work upstream so that other organizations and food banks and partners downstream may have the resources to be able to do it. This is really hard work because, to be honest with you, I can't speak for my brother Lupe, but people often ask me, well, what are you directly doing? Well, the reality is we can't directly impact it's because we want to make as much impact upstream that we've chosen to focus the bulk of our resources, our imagination, our prophetic work around the advocacy work. But I can't send you pictures of water wells and food being distributed out of our own hands because we've chosen to do that work. Now, having said that, there's few things that I would say in response to your question. Number one, I would say, Bread for the World, we're committed to prayer. And I know it sounds really overly Christianese, but I don't want to diminish the importance of prayer. And the reason why it matters for us is that it helps us to lament and to break for the things that break God's heart. And in a world today where we're constantly moving, I think all of us need to have our hearts soft and tender and to be broken for the things that really break God's heart. If we're not careful, we're just going to not live in reality just because I'm doing okay or my family is doing okay. You and I might be doing okay personally, but we know, we've seen with our own eyes, we've seen with our own and felt with our own hands that something is dramatically wrong and broken in our larger nation. So lament leads to compassion, and I think compassion leads to action. So a few things about action that I would say, and some of this might sound repetitive. We have to keep contacting our congressional leaders. Even if it feels uphill, we have to keep contacting our congressional leaders, and specifically, particularly around domestic issues. That's increasing SNAP benefits by 15% is going to do wonders in the short term. It's not the long-term solution, but in the short term, it's going to address the needs that people have. Even if it might not sound very, how would I say this? Not everybody will agree with this, but we're also advocating for people that are undocumented. That, again, as a Christian organization, we believe that every single human being deserves dignity. And so when people are hungry or starving or they're lacking in resources, we're continually having these conversations as wisely as we can in a very polarized context. The last part of this question that I would say, well, there's two more parts. Second to last is, to your point, we have to keep addressing the more root systemic issues. That's the hard part. I'm not trying to diminish the value and importance of food banks. As we elevate food banks, we have to ask ourselves, why is there ongoing need when we keep talking about the greatest wealth in our nation? When we're talking about the stock market being at record highs, what's the disconnect? And the disconnect is only 50% of Americans are invested in Wall Street. And of that 50%, 8% basically dominates the wealth of our Wall Street, according to some research. That means there are so many millions of Americans who are hardworking, who just don't have the access to be able to experience a bit more of cushion or flourishing or margin in their lives. Job instability, minimum pay wage, food shortages, food systems, infrastructure in our nation, climate change is an issue, war and conflict, not necessarily in the US, but certainly in other places, but violence is an issue in the United States, racism and discrimination, nutritional quality is a huge issue. For many years, all we talked about was calories, but now we realize it's not just calories. We have to talk about nutritional quality. And then we have to also talk about what does it mean to make sure that we're also addressing all of the systemic things, but also personal leadership and responsibility, and about wealth and relationships. Like, we have to understand that we're all connected together to formulate a deeper sense of connectedness. I have so much more to share, but I think I'll stop right there and see if there are some additional questions.
We do have, we're running towards the end of our program, but we do have one question from Kathleen Hone.
Hello. So I, as a practicing Christian, often find myself in discussions with either non-practicing Christians or non-believers who are uncomfortable coming into the fold of Christian organizations. And I want to know how you maneuver into bringing non-believers or non-practicing Christians into working with your organization?
Yeah, Kathleen, great question. Thank you very much. So what I would share is that, Bread for the World is a Christian advocacy organization. But having said that, we understand that poverty is not a partisan issue, and it's not just a passion or a responsibility for faith-based constituents. It's something that every single one of us should be passionate about, and that is happening. But because the issue of poverty is so dramatic, we can't be working in silos, but we want to work in collaboration and partnership. That's what Bread for the World does. So while I'm fully comfortable in my skin as a Christian and as a minister, I also want you and others that might be watching this to know that on a daily basis, we're constantly talking and collaborating with anyone and everyone that says we believe in the dignity of every single human being. Second thing that I'll say is, yes, as a Christian org, we want to be very confident in our identity, but we never want to hide behind our Christian identity, meaning we have to make sure that our work speaks for itself, that it's credible, that it has respect of those that are part of our larger coalition, whether they're faith-based and non-faith-based. So to the person who's not a Christian or a religious, we would say, partner with us so that you can discern if we have the ability to make significant impact against eradicating, ending hunger in our nation and around the world.
Thank you very much, Reverend Cho, for that response. We do have some really good questions in the chat, but those might require a longer conversation. And so we have opportunities for us to continue the conversation. One thing that I wanted to bring up and to review is our Bread for the World cycle of advocacy. Bread for the World, this is our cycle of advocacy in terms of what 2020 looked like, but also kind of a preview of 2021. So in that first quarter, that's our Offering of Letters campaign, our launch and rollout. Bread for the World will be working on educational materials on global nutrition and domestic nutrition issues. And we look forward to connecting with you and your church, your community, your food bank, your people in order to do that Offering of Letters. We go into our advocacy summit in our lobby day, which is typically in June. We did that virtually this summer, and so we appreciate everybody that was there with us. Then we follow that up with in-district meetings. So if you have not met with your member of Congress, now is the time to do it. We'll actually be doing some member meetings in December in Texas with our Senators Cruz and Cornyn, in Arizona with Senator Sinema and Senator-elect Kelly. And then we'll be reaching out to the newest congressional delegation, the newest members of Congress from New Mexico and Oklahoma. And so that going into the fourth quarter is really a time to reflect, celebrate, and look at Bread for the World Sunday. Let's see. I just want to give a very special shout out to all of the faith leaders and pastors who signed on to our COVID-19 relief package faith leader sign-on letter. All of these folks here are represented at the Southwest in a letter to our members of Congress asking for COVID-19 relief now in the lame duck session. So we really appreciate you. And if you or your pastor or someone in your faith community or even yourself would like to sign on to this letter or get more information, please let me know. If you'd like to follow up in these conversations, whether it's about the Farm Bill, or whether it's about SNAP, whether it's about Guatemala or foreign affairs, you can meet with us at our New Mexico Hunger Advocacy Zoom call, which is going to be this Friday at noon Mountain Time. And then the Arizona Hunger Advocacy Zoom is sponsored by the Arizona Food Bank Network. And that's going to be next Friday, the 27th, Black Friday at noon. And then the first Friday of December is the Texas and Oklahoma Advocacy Zoom call at noon Central Time. So make sure that you know it's noon Central Time, 11 Mountain Time. We just want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining us, and I'm going to pass it over to my co-host just to close us out.
Thank you all for spending some time with us today. Thank you so much to Reverend Cho for your message, for your passion, for your energy. We're following what you're doing and we're loving it. And I think every single person on this call learned a lot today. Everyone's engaged here, and I think that's the most important thing of all. As I said at the beginning, we'll follow up with you, sharing a link to the recording and links to opportunities to engage with Lutheran Advocacy Ministry of Arizona, with Bread for the World, and also with Spirit in the Desert.
And Solveig, there is one last question that we have for Reverend Eugene Cho, and that is, it was submitted to us, and the question is, how do I donate?
Okay.
Well, it's a great question. And what I would suggest is, if you're interested in donating to Bread, simply come to bread.org. But here would be my request. We would love for you to partner with us. We want it to be a relationship and not just merely a transactional thing. So partner with us, grow with us, become a member. And part of the way that you can do that is to become a monthly donor, whether it's $2, $5, $10, whatever it might be, but to become a monthly donor. There's been some amazing partners here on this call as well. And I would just urge you, as I've done, is to support your local food banks as well. It's not one or the other. We really need a both and situation, all of us together. So thank you again for the opportunity to share about the work of Bread.
Thank you. Reverend Cho, I promised everybody on the chat that I would send you the questions that we didn't get to. So I hope that you'll have some time to just jot a few answers to those, and I will get those back to everyone who participated.
Yes. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, Carlos said that there's 1/3 of people on the call are from New Mexico. So Carlos, we want to give a shout out to the New Mexico Bread team. Thank you so much. Of course, Arizona, we love you. Texas, we love you. Oklahoma, we love you. Thank you, everybody. Have a blessed day, and we look forward to seeing you at the hunger advocacy calls, the state calls, and then working on our offering of letters for 2021. Everybody have a blessed day. We're going to go ahead and end the Zoom now.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone.